Have you ever found yourself in a, like, deeply frustrating argument that just goes around in endless circles?
Yeah.
You know, the kind where you're exhausted, your heart rate is way up, and you've been going back and forth for like an hour.
Oh, absolutely. We've all been there.
Right. You're bringing up evidence, and they're countering it, and then eventually, agonizingly, you realize something that makes your stomach just drop.
You realize you weren't even having the same argument.
Exactly. You and the other person were actually talking about two completely different things from the very beginning.
It's an incredibly common, almost universal experience. And it almost always ends with this sudden deflation where you both realize that all that anger was essentially based on a mirage. I mean,
Yeah.
you were shadowboxing a ghost.
Shadowboxing a ghost, yeah, that's exactly it. Well, our mission for today's deep dive is to figure out the mechanics of exactly why that happens, and more importantly, how to stop it. We're looking at a classic, frankly mind-bending framework from A.E. Mander's guide, Clearer Thinking.
It's such a good one.
It really is.
Yeah.
Specifically, we're zooming in on a concept called speaking the same language. We are going to explore why, assuming we understand the words of others, is the root of almost all feudal arguments. And, you know, how learning to actively translate our own native tongue is the ultimate shortcut to becoming a clearer thinker.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the baseline assumption we all carry around every single day is that if you and I both speak English, we speak the same language.
We do assume that, yeah. And it feels entirely obvious, right? Like, if we both read the same dictionary, we speak the same language.
Right.
But Mander argues we have to completely discard that idea right out of the gate. We have to fundamentally redefine what a language actually is.
Okay, so what is it then?
Well, a language isn't merely a collection of words. A dictionary does not equal a language. Rather, language is the relation of words to their meanings.
Wait, pause on that for a second. The relation of words to their meaning. So you're saying just speaking the identical syllables out loud does not mean you are speaking the same language.
Precisely. To truly speak the same language, you must use the same words with the same internal meanings.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and when you define language strictly by that relation, you very quickly realize that probably no two people on Earth speak exactly the same language.
Which is a wild thing to consider. I mean,
Yeah.
you walk around thinking you're communicating perfectly well with your neighbor, your spouse, your coworkers.
Right, but you're probably not. And the text brings up this fascinating contrast about how our brains behave when we deal with foreign languages versus our native tongue. Like when you or I try to speak with someone from France or Germany, our cognitive guard is immediately up.
Yeah, because we don't know the language perfectly.
Exactly. We are hyper aware of the potential for misunderstanding. Mander points out that a word like conscience exists in both French and English.
Oh, really?
Yeah, but it carries entirely different cultural and philosophical nuances in French. Or the word genial, which occurs in German and English, but with totally different meanings. Because we know we're dealing with a foreign language, our brain's prefrontal cortex kicks in. We actively translate, we pause, we ask for clarification,
We never just assume the phonetic sound hitting our eardrum maps perfectly to the definitions stored in our head.
Exactly. But with our fellow English speakers, that cognitive guard is just completely down.
We are totally defenseless. And there are these fantastic geographical traps in the book that perfectly show how the relation of word to meaning changes even within the same tongue.
Oh, the American versus English examples.
Yes. Take the word homely. To an Englishman, calling a woman homely is actually quite agreeable. It means she is like pleasant, natural, and has great domestic qualities. It's a genuine compliment over there.
But imagine that same English gentleman traveling to America, right? He attends a dinner party and describes his host's daughter as homely.
Oh, no.
He is going to cause a massive, highly uncomfortable offense. Because to an American ear, homely means plain, unattractive, or ugly.
It's the exact same word, but the internal wiring is completely different. The text also mentions the word solicitor.
Right.
If you're in America and someone says a solicitor's at the door, you're picturing a traveling salesman, maybe someone trying to sell you a magazine subscription or like solar panels.
But in England, a solicitor is a highly trained, respected lawyer.
Exactly. Or the word dumb, which historically meant physically unable to speak in England, but in America, it evolved to mean stupid or foolish.
What's fascinating here is that the greatest danger to clear thinking isn't a lack of vocabulary. It is not that we don't know enough big, fancy words.
So what is the real danger?
The real danger is a false sense of security. We wrongly assume that because we share the phonetic sounds, because the syllables are familiar, we automatically share the internal definitions.
We let the comforting familiarity of the sound completely blind us to the vast disparity of the meaning.
Exactly. Our brains love cognitive shortcuts. I mean, why expend the energy to translate a word you've heard 1,000 times?
Wait, as you're saying that, I'm thinking about a USB-C cable.
Okay, how so?
Think about it. You grab a USB-C cable off your desk. The plug fits perfectly into the port on your laptop. And you just assume it's going to transfer that massive video file to your external hard drive because the outward physical appearance matches perfectly.
Right.
But sometimes that specific identical-looking cable is only wired internally for power. It will charge your device, but it will never transfer a single megabyte of data. The matching outward appearance, which is the word itself, completely hides the entirely different internal wiring, which is the meaning.
That is a perfect modern equivalent. We plug the word into our sentence, it fits grammatically, it sounds right, but the data transfer completely fails because the internal wiring is fundamentally mismatched between the speaker and the listener.
Yeah, and this false sense of security exists in everyday English, right? In our own living rooms, not just across the Atlantic Ocean.
Absolutely.
Okay, so a mismatch with a word like homely or solicitor is awkward, sure. But usually context eventually clues you in that something is wrong. So how exactly does this phenomenon cause our arguments to completely derail into toxic, hours-long fights?
Right, that's the big question.
Yeah, because that's the real meat of this deep dive. Where does the real danger actually lie?
It lies in the leap from concrete objects to abstract concepts. To illustrate this, Mander gives this brilliant, utterly absurd thought experiment.
Oh, the elephant one.
Yes. Suppose when I use the word elephant, I actually mean the exact same animal you mean when you say the word camel.
Okay, so in my head, I'm picturing a massive gray animal with big ears and a trunk.
Right.
And in your head, you're picturing a pan, long-legged animal with a giant hump on its back. But we're both saying the word elephant out loud in our conversation.
Exactly. Now suppose we sit down and try to debate whether an elephant has a trunk. I say, of course an elephant has a trunk.
And I say, are you crazy? An elephant absolutely does not have a trunk. It has a hump.
Right, and the argument is going to become instantly heated. It will be completely incoherent. I will think you are a profound fool who knows nothing about biology, and you will think I am entirely detached from reality.
We'll definitely start yelling at each other.
Yeah.
We'll be questioning your basic intelligence.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I have to push back a little here. Nobody actually does this.
Yeah.
Nobody mixes up elephants and camels in real life.
No, of course they don't. But that's the point of the thought experiment. Because with physical animals, with concrete objects, we have a very quick, foolproof fix available to us.
Which is?
We can simply pause the screaming match, drive down to the local zoo, walk up to the physical enclosure, point our fingers at the creature with the long gray nose and say, there. That physical thing right there is what the word elephant means to me.
And instantly, the illusion is shattered. You look at it and say, oh, you mean that animal? I call that a camel. And the entire argument just vanishes into thin air. The conflict was never actually about zoology. It was entirely about the labeling of our mental folders. The physical zoo provides an objective reality check that resolves the data mismatch.
Precisely. But here's the critical pivot. The true danger, the place where arguments destroy relationships and stall progress, lies in our abstract terms. Words that represent ideas, systems, philosophies, or values.
Because we can't point to them in a zoo.
Exactly. You cannot drive to an enclosure and point at a physical manifestation of an abstract idea.
And these are the words we actually argue about the most in society. The text lists a few examples, and honestly, they haven't changed at all since it was written. Words like socialism, liberty, education, democrat, capital, or God.
Heavy words.
Very heavy. And frankly, people throw around words like socialism or liberty constantly today. And just to be absolutely clear to everyone listening, regardless of where you or I sit on the political spectrum, because we absolutely aren't here to debate the politics themselves or take any sides, the linguistic mechanics of these arguments are just fascinating. Because both sides are essentially fighting ghosts.
It is entirely about the mechanics. Think about a word like liberty. Imagine two people passionately arguing about liberty. Maybe it's a debate about public health regulations or freedom of speech.
Okay, sure.
They are using the exact same phonetic sound, hitting each other's eardrums with the word liberty, but one person's internal definition, their internal wiring, might mean The absolute freedom to do whatever I want with my property without any government interference.
Right.
The other person's internal definition might mean freedom from the societal harms, monopolies, or secondary effects caused by completely unchecked behavior.
Right. Totally different internal meanings. Or take a word like education. I might walk into your mental zoo, follow the sign that says education, and expect to find a traditional classroom with desks, standardized tests, and a teacher lecturing at a chalkboard.
That's a common one?
But in your mental zoo, the education exhibit is like an apprenticeship or self-directed reading or learning how to critically evaluate information rather than just memorizing facts. We could argue for days about school funding while completely missing that our baseline definitions of the goal of education are totally different.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you can instantly see how this explains so much of the dysfunction in our modern discourse. Politicians, pundits, and frankly us in our daily lives constantly use these massive, heavy, abstract words. Progress, fairness, justice.
Yeah.
Yet we rarely, if ever, mean the exact same thing as the person we are debating. The core philosophy here is that knowledge and communication are only valuable when they are deeply understood. We are endlessly arguing about whether the elephant has a trunk, but we forgot to check if the other person is picturing a camel.
It makes you wonder, are we actually just talking past each other 90% of the time? Because we lack that physical objective zoo to point to, Mander concludes something quite staggering. He claims that the vast majority of arguments and discussions in everyday life are utterly futile.
Futile.
Yeah, a sheer waste of time and temper, hopeless from the very start, simply because the parties do not recognize they are speaking different languages.
And because of that futility, the text introduces a very striking, almost provocative claim to highlight what the actual solution looks like.
Oh, the foreign language thing.
Yes. It argues that if two people are arguing over complex abstract terms in English, they would actually have a better chance of convincing each other if one spoke only Russian and the other spoke only Portuguese.
See, hold on, that just sounds ridiculous. How can two people who literally cannot understand a single syllable of each other's spoken language, who can't even say hello, have a better chance of a productive debate than two native English speakers who grew up in the same country? That makes absolutely no sense to me.
I know, it sounds totally counterintuitive, but this raises an important question. What is the very first thing that happens when a Russian speaker and a Portuguese speaker try to debate a complex topic?
Well, they stare at each other blankly.
Exactly. Within the first 3 seconds of the interaction, they realize they have a catastrophic communication barrier. The self-awareness is immediate and undeniable.
Oh, I see.
They would instantly recognize the fundamental, non-negotiable need to call in an interpreter. They cannot proceed a single inch without one.
Oh, wow. Okay, I see it now. They wouldn't even attempt to debate the intricacies of a word like liberty because they know they are completely unequipped to do so. They are forced to build a bridge before they try to drive a massive truck across it.
Yes. But in our native tongue, we completely lack that self-awareness. Because the English words sound familiar, our brains take that cognitive shortcut.
We assume the bridge is already built.
Exactly. We skip the essential interpreter phase entirely. We just hit the gas, start yelling our points, and drive our truck right into the river.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because obviously, the solution isn't to literally hire a third-party linguist to follow us around at dinner parties or sit between us and our spouses.
That would be pretty weird.
Very weird. The interpreter we need isn't a third person at all. It's a preliminary phase of the conversation itself. It is a specific habit of mind.
It is the discipline of translation applied to our own language. Before you engage in the debate, before you launch your counter-argument, you must translate the abstract term into concrete shared meaning.
It's like construction.
Yeah.
You cannot build the roof of an argument if you haven't poured the concrete foundation of shared definitions. If you skip pouring that foundation, the whole house collapses the second you put any real weight or emotional tension on it.
And we see this collapse constantly. We see it in corporate boardrooms, in political debates, in marriages. Two people arguing fiercely, both feeling entirely misunderstood, both thinking the other person is being stubbornly irrational or deliberately obtuse.
Yeah.
But logic cannot operate on undefined terms. If the variables in your mental algebra stand for completely different numbers than the variables in my mental algebra, we will never, ever arrive at the same solution.
Okay, but let's be real for a second. Let's talk about the practicality of this. If I am in the middle of a heated argument with my partner about something like household responsibilities, and tensions are really high, and I suddenly put up my hands and say, "Excuse me, could you please provide your dictionary definition of the word fairness?"
Yeah, that won't go over well.
They aren't going to thank me for being a clear thinker. They're going to think I'm being a condescending, arrogant jerk. How do you actually do this without sounding like a robot?
That is the most crucial pushback because the delivery is everything. You absolutely cannot weaponize this concept.
Right.
If you use it to play semantics or to avoid the emotional reality of the argument, it will backfire spectacularly. It requires a radical humility. You aren't demanding their definition to prove them wrong. You are asking for clarification because you are admitting your own potential misunderstanding.
So it's a subtle shift in framing. It's not define your terms, you're using the word
Yeah.
wrong. It's more like, wait, I want to make sure I'm actually hearing you correctly.
Yeah.
When you say my tone wasn't supportive, what does support look like to you in this specific moment?
Exactly. You make the abstract concrete. You are gently asking them to take you to their mental zoo. And until you establish that baseline, every breath you spend arguing is just wasted.
Wow.
Treating English, when dealing with abstracts, as a foreign language requires careful, deliberate translation driven by genuine curiosity, not pedantry.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? I really want to distill this core takeaway. If you want to be truly well-informed, if you want your logic to be sound and your arguments to actually mean something, rather than just raising your blood pressure, you have to make a vow.
A very important vow.
You must vow to never take part in an argument on any subject with anyone without first ensuring that both parties are using words in the exact same sense.
It sounds deceptively simple, but it is incredibly difficult in practice because it requires slowing down. It requires interrupting the emotional momentum of an argument to do, like administrative, linguistic work. But it is the only way out of the trap of circular fighting.
And to help you build this habit, we want to pass on a piece of practical homework directly to you. It's a challenge to try over the next week. It's very simple, but it will completely alter the way you interact with people.
I love this part.
When you are in a conversation and someone uses a heavy, abstract word, words like progress or instinct or conscience, simply stop them. Gently pause the conversation and ask them, what exactly do you mean by that term?
You will be astonishingly surprised at what happens. Often the other person will initially struggle to define it themselves. They will realize they were using a heavy word as a vague feeling rather than a precise thought.
Yeah.
And once you do work together to define it, you will frequently find that the argument you were about to have completely evaporates. You realize you actually agree on the core concept, you were just applying different labels.
Or, conversely, you realize you disagree so fundamentally on the basic premise that debating the finer points is utterly useless until you resolve that core difference in worldview. Either way, it saves you hours of frustration.
It truly is the ultimate intellectual shortcut. By taking 5 minutes to define your terms up front, you save 5 hours of futile circular arguing later.
It really makes you rethink every argument you've ever had. Which leaves us with a final, slightly uncomfortable thought for you to mull over. We started this deep dive talking about that frustrating experience of going around in circles, only to realize you were talking about different things.
Right.
But consider this. If we spent half of our conversational energy simply defining the words we use, would we discover that many of our deepest, most bitter disagreements in society are actually just illusions of vocabulary?
That is a wild thought.
Does true, meaningful disagreement actually require us to first be in total, absolute agreement on our definition? Think about your own mental zoo the next time you find yourself getting heated. Are you arguing about the trunk when the other person is looking at a hump?